Merrily.
Good day, everybody. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I was looking up Barnsley before I got on here. I believe as we take this journey and make the program, inevitably God, higher power, a priority in our lives, that we can start to, I say this with a grain of salt, but live a life that we couldn't do before. And so one of my dreams is to travel. And I would love to see you guys someday. And with that being said, my name is Merrily W, and I am a recovered alcoholic. My sobriety book date, I believe, is January 17th of 2015. That is not an exact day. I was incarcerated around that time here in the States, and things were very foggy for me. And it's funny because I was in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and other fellowships for a long time before that. And there were times when I knew my exact day. And I had made a decision to never go back to alcohol, and was very proud of my chips and counting days. And none of that worked for me. So it's funny that the day that I have is, it wasn't this time, it was never about the day. It was more about something that happened in my heart, combined with a willingness, which I'm going to talk about, and combined with this place of being, willing to go to any lengths, and combined with people that my higher power, God, directed me to, that really were very serious about the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe all those things in unison have saved my life today. So I'm going to start out. I've never attended your meeting, but I believe that from what I've heard, and I see some friends here, are very big book centered. So I'm going to start out in a place of the big book around step 1. And when it says, it's in a vision for you. The less people tolerated us, the more we withdrew from society, from life itself, as we became subjects of King Alcohol, shivering denizens of his mad realm. The chilling vapor that is loneliness settled down. It thickened, ever becoming blacker. Some of us sought out sordid places, hoping to find understanding, companionship, and approval. Momentarily we did, then would come oblivion and the awful awakening to face the hideous 4 horsemen. Terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair. Unhappy drinkers who read this page will understand. And there's another place in a vision for you where it says hopelessness. It's part of someone's story. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, "Oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here. I'm afraid to go out the door and I can't understand it." I believe that the allergy was present in my life from a very early age. And the allergy for alcoholism, it so beautifully describes in the doctor's opinion. It's when I put alcohol in my body that my body is not the same as non-alcoholics, and I can't control the amount that I'm taking. In the beginning, there were moments maybe where I could control the amount. There was a time that I really liked a gentleman, and I was able to have 2 glasses of wine. Those times were very short-lived, but even from a young age, I would put alcohol in my body, and then I would want the second one even more. I would want the third one even more, and the fourth one even more, and I would keep going with that. So with that being said, as time progressed, because I don't even know how old I am right now. I'm either 47 or 48, but as time progressed, the alcoholism progressed. And so what it progressed into is what I just read out of A Vision for You, and into also on page 157, that I continued to make promises that I would never drink again. and I kept drinking. And I was in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So all this had been going on for quite a long time. And I don't want to get too caught into my story because that often happens to me as I'll start talking all about my step one experience. And then 50 minutes has gone by, which sounds like a lot of time. I was like, what am I going to talk about for 50 minutes? But so even probably from about 15 years old, the allergy was happening. I was a cheerleader at my school, my high school. There was a time that they offered me some beer, and I just continued to do beer bongs, which is you're shooting it in your body with Everclear, to the point where I showed up at the game and my parents were there. That was supposed to be a proud moment in their lives. And it was not a proud moment. They watched me do a face plant at a very young age. And so as those times continued to go on, I got suspended from high school. I still was not able to stop and control it, but my mind would tell me that I could. And that went on for a long time. I ended up leaving my hometown and I went on tour with a band called the Grateful Dead. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of them, but they were a popular band in the whatever years those were, 1970s to probably through the 1990s. And I thought I was just going to have fun and I really wanted to get away from my family. But what I ended up doing there was going into a society that it was just, if I drank every day, all day long, it didn't matter. But even there, because I have friends still from that era of my life that they drank as much as I did, and they are not alcoholics. They drank every day, but they didn't take it where I took it. Some horrific things happened. I ended up living on the streets as well in major cities around the United States and San Francisco, out east, so forth, Atlanta, and but none of that makes me an alcoholic. But one of the continuous places of that is alcohol was always there. And again, could drink a lot. And I would always look at these outside things that were happening to me as that if I just would get off the streets, if I just wasn't touring with this band, if I just started, and I did all these things, got a regular job, if I, got rid of the boyfriend who was abusive, if I started going to college, which I did for a short period of, in and out of college, that the alcoholism would clean itself up. And so I want to go back to the doctor's opinion real quick. And when it says that it talks about the allergy, and it says, we believe and so suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. That phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. So as my disease progressed, also there were a lot of outside problems that were progressing legally. In my heart, I remember looking around and just feeling so lonely and dead inside. That also started from a young age. But again, it was that if I fixed all the problems, the alcoholism wouldn't be going on. And during this time, I hear people saying, hey, well, what do you live under a rock? You don't realize what AA is? I had no idea what Alcoholics Anonymous was. I had no idea about alcoholism. I knew there were people around me that drank a lot of alcohol. I could see a lot of the older people, because at this point I was younger, that were very rough and alcohol had destroyed their lives. And I just knew I didn't want to be like them, but I really did not know about alcoholism. And that's why I believe that it's so important that we're carrying this message, because we don't know I believe there are still people today that do not understand alcoholism and are not really fully aware of AA. So I believe that hasn't changed. But through this period of time, I tried a lot of different things. And it talks about that in the big book on page 30. Some of the things that I tried where I started going to counseling for depression. Like I said, I started to clean up my life and get legal and look what I saw in some other women, really. I started to try to get self-esteem and not be in the bad relationships I was in. I stopped selling certain things to make money that I won't talk about here. And really just was trying to be a better citizen in general. And none of that worked. What I didn't understand is this part, the twofold disease, that something was going on in my body, that no matter what I changed on the outside, it wasn't going to make it any better. So as time progressed, I ended up getting pregnant with my first child, and I drank all the way till I was 5 months pregnant. And I was drinking a lot. Handles of vodka, bottles of wine. I remember looking at my ex and saying, I shouldn't have a child because I am drinking so much. But yet I did nothing about it. I decided, sort of, because I was really messed up, that I was going to have the child. But, and I kept believing every day that that was enough for me to not drink anymore. Like, I believe that. And if there's any mothers on here and fathers that know the strength of what having children does to you in your life, and I've heard other people in this meeting talk about, what a parent is supposed to look like, nurturing and so forth. That place in our hearts is such a heartstring that would have been one of the strongest reasons for me to not drink anymore. And yet every day I would make that solemn oath that I am going to quit today because I have this living being in my body, and I couldn't do it. And so, as usual, my higher power, God, does for me what I cannot do for myself. And I ended up getting, me and my ex got in a fight, and I got arrested again for something, and was put into incarceration. And they realized that I was pregnant, and they put me in my first treatment center. I was there for about 3 weeks, and Alcoholics Anonymous did come in there, and I was like, oh my gosh, alcohol. I just knew at that time that I related. I ended up getting out of that treatment center, and I believed in my depths of my soul that I would never again pick up another drink, because now I'm sober and I'm pregnant and I've made this decision. And what I did was I ended up not being a part of AA. I stayed in my house, and one day it sounded like a good idea to have a beer while I was cleaning the house because I was bored. And so when it talks there about men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol, the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. Their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They're restless, irritable, and discontent. So that would be a form of restlessness, discontent. And I was also irritable, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. And this is repeated over and over and over and over for me. So at that point, I went into this pattern, or I don't know what you'd call it, life, of when I picked up that drink with my young daughter, things started to spiral, and eventually she got removed from my custody for the first time. She was gone from me. Not gone forever, but she was taken out of my care and put into my brother's care. And that pattern continued on for at least 10 years. My daughter was taken 4 times. My daughter, she's 17 years old now. And each time I would make this firm resolution to never drink again. And I would mean it from the depths of my soul. I would look at her. I cared about her so much. Not only that, but when the allergy hit and I would put alcohol in my body, I would do things like leave her alone at home, and I would go out to the bar because I needed alcohol like I needed air. And that, when the big book talks about alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful, that is the power of alcoholism. I don't always go into my in-depth story. It does help some people, but I think if people sometimes hear the severity of that, then they might say, well, I'm not an alcoholic. We don't have to have all those consequences, but it's really important to see that in myself, in my own story, am I able to control it? And then as time goes on, do I make decisions? And I have a 7-year-old. Here he comes right now. Minnie, you're going to have to wait. Okay, you take this from me. Thank you. So, yeah. So that actually ended up happening with my son as well. I was in my 3rd sober house, had already been in 7 treatment centers. I swore I would never drink again. When I was so broken inside from losing my daughter that I had this great idea that if I had another child, I would be okay. I also like to make people my higher powers. So with that being said, I picked up again with him. I was 7 months pregnant. At that point, I had met somebody from Primary Purpose Group. They let me out from incarceration. I went down to a larger city, and I started going to a big book group that talked exactly what we talk about in these groups, about the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind. And they would read this page to me. Not only this page, but they would talk a lot about how we've lost the power of choice. And it says, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And it talks also about parallel thinking. That my thinking, and I don't know the exact page, will be hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time I shall handle myself like other people. It won't matter the consequences. That is step 1. I will always go back to alcohol without this connection from God and my own understanding. That is the place of concession in my heart, that I will always go back to alcohol. And when I first heard that in a meeting, I had already been through all those consequences. And I looked up at them in front of 200 people and I said, what do you mean I've lost the power of choice? That's BS. I have been pouring this stuff down my body. And that was right before I got pregnant and sober living. And then that was right before I went to back to my hometown. I used the excuse that the meetings were not like the meetings that had saved my life, that I could not be in these meetings. But really what happened was I got in resentment and I wasn't living in 10, 11, and 12. And the thought again came into my mind at 7 months pregnant that this time it will be different and I will control it and I will enjoy it. And again, I picked up that drink. And I knew then, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to find people that can really help take me through the big book. So and I knew then that I had lost the power of choice, that I won't choose when I drink again. And that those thoughts in my mind that are hazily and readily supplanted, whatever those consequences are, they might be in there, but they're very foggy. They have never been as strong as this other thought that's in my mind. And they come in parallel together. But this other rational, sane thinking of the consequences of the hurt, of the incomprehensible demoralization, when that true obsession comes in the mind, is never strong enough to push out this thought that is completely insane. It's a lack of proportion to think straight around alcohol. And it comes in, and that other thought says, this time I'll just have a couple. This time no one will know. This time I won't hurt anybody. This time I'll stop. I'll just stop. and it will be controlled. And I'll be like those other moms who had a couple drinks during pregnancy, and it will be all okay. And either that happens or this other process, this mental blank spot happens. That's also happened to me, where I wake up and I'm just like, I don't know how I got started, but I'm drinking again. And it's not even like a wake up from a blackout. It's just like, how did this happen again? So the mental obsession and losing the power of choice around alcohol was a concession that eluded me for a long time within the rooms. But when it came strong. And it was this place of, oh my gosh, I am completely powerless. I don't know how to get out of this box, but I know that there's people out there who drank like I did that have gotten out of this box and are sober today. So I quickly got on the phone and called my old sponsor from PPG, because I knew that there wasn't strong big book where I lived. And I also had a feeling that I did not have a lot of time until I would drink again. So none of the control systems that I tried to put in place for a long time, of all the treatment centers, I've taken all the pills, naltrexone, Camprol, all of that, drank on Antabuse, drank on all those, all the counseling. Those things can be wonderful, and I really don't have any opinion on those, but I know for me that that this has worked. And so that brought me into step 2. It was really a hope in the beginning that I saw in other people's eyes. And so when people asked me, and I was taken through steps 1, 2, and 3 very quickly, they asked me, they didn't really care about my conception of God. They just asked me these simple questions. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful, effective spiritual structure can be built. And that was all I needed in the beginning. It really, that desperation and willingness, little pieces of honesty. I was still having a hard time doing some very dishonest acts, but the willingness to just continue to go through this book. Steps 10, 11, and 12, because I was in the fellowship and I had people try to do more in-depth step 2 with me and step 3. They wanted me to mind map about my higher power. Again, not making fun of that if that works for somebody, but I did not have a lot of time until that obsession would come back. And I believe that to the depths of my soul. So, but living in 10, 11, and 12 opens up steps 2 and 3. Those continue to grow. And so starting with this simple cornerstone, and I also did not like this chapter, We Agnostics, because it didn't make sense to me. I was like, what are they talking about? So just that willingness. I also want to point out this place where it says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. Such codes and philosophies did not save me today. So stepping away from my original step 2 experience, which was very simple, and bringing it into today, there are many times that I have sat in prayer and meditation in step 11, been working with others in step 12, because in the beginning, it was more about, did I do step 10? Check. Did I do step 11? Check. Did I do step 12? Check. And for the first time, I wasn't drinking, and that hadn't happened in a long time, so that was a miracle. As I've moved forward, and there was also, I was still very sick, and I want to talk about this place as a mother. So by this time, my kids had come back to me after I lost custody of both of them, or seemingly lost custody. They were in the house. I was having a hard time. I was sober, but I was having night terrors all night. I couldn't even really make dinner. Why they were in the house, who knows, but obviously there's a bigger plan. And I still had a lot of fear and a lot of anger and rage. For the first time, like I said, I was having night terrors, so I could roll over and I could jump into a step 10 or prayer and meditation in the middle of the night. And I would feel God started becoming my best friend, even within all that insanity and chaos and a lot of being very mentally sick, of what people would call mental diagnoses. I had a lot of those. I speak about that because there is hope. Not that we need to have opinions about that in the air, but I do have experience. And I would roll over and I would go into that place of centering with God or higher power. And I would feel peace and I would feel contentment. And even if it was for 5 minutes at a time, I did not feel that. I did not feel that for years. I didn't kill myself, but I wanted to die every moment of every day. There were no moments of peace. There was no sparkling sunshine. And so to start feeling that for 5 minutes, to start to not be drinking, as you know, a one moment at a time, that was what I held on to. I'm like, something is working. And to start feeling that peace and contentment at the end of going from step 4 into step 5, I knew that it worked. So in the beginning, it was just like about just 10, 11, and 12 to the best of my ability, and really that willingness carrying us aside. But there was still a lot of anger and rage for me. And there was a lot of guilt and shame, a lot. And that guilt and shame blocks me as much as my self-righteousness from the creator of the universe. I like to read this part of the book because I do not have the power to change myself. I've never had the power to change myself. And I've wasted a lot of time in Alcoholics Anonymous hearing other people and comparing myself to other people talk about humility, patience, tolerance, kindness, what that looks like for them. And that's important because I had no idea what it even looked like to live a sane life. But at the same time, it's about this process. It's sort of, I always talk about God or higher power is not black and white. So it's sort of this middle area that's hard to explain. And I'm sure a lot of you know through just starting this process that, where was I going with all this? Is that it's just these mere code of morals or better philosophy were not sufficient to overcome alcoholism. So not only is that my alcoholism actively, but my untreated alcoholism with time away from a drink. So I was very rageful and angry as a mom. And to know that that happened, and for me to talk about it today is huge because I couldn't talk about it. So back to steps 2 and 3, they were very simple in the beginning. I went into step 4. I went into step 5. I started to feel that peace and contentment. I didn't even really know what I was doing in step 6, but I read the paragraphs out of the book. I spent in step 5 that hour. I went into 8 and 9. I started making amends. And I remember my daughter looking up at me. My mom was there and she goes, "Guess what mom just said to me?" Mom just said that I didn't say I was sorry, but she was younger at that point. Mom said she was sorry, and the light in her eyes that came from that. There were other amends that I didn't make, but that I didn't want to make. I actually got in a fight with my first sponsor around the amends, but my sponsor said, "You're going to do this or else I'm not going to work with you anymore." And I knew I didn't want to go back to alcohol. So, and also that incomprehensible demoralization of the extreme suffering. And my mom was around at the time. It's right around the time I made amends to my daughter. She said, "Merrily, something's working. I don't care what you think of this woman. Something's working, and I want you to listen to her." And I was like, okay. And then I was at the sober house still. And there was a lot of women there that just sort of were using the sober house to stay sober. But I remember I would get up really early and I would start, looking at 10 and doing, looking at 11 and it was a little different. I know people have their different ways with that, but at least I was willing to get up early and spend this time with my creator. And I had very little sobriety and I would walk across in Colorado where I live. There's mountains and there's snow. And I would walk across the bridge often to go downtown and help another alcoholic. It didn't matter if it worked out. It wasn't, I mean, I know now that my ego was attached to the outcome, but at least I was doing it. And I started feeling a spiritual awakening for the first time in my life, over 13 years in AA, and I'd never felt this before. And that's when I came back home and walked away from 10, 11, and 12. I did relapse. Luckily, there were a lot of people, I live in a smaller town, that were watching me. So the consequences started to happen real quick. Plus, I picked up with my second pregnancy. I signed my son over, the one that was just in here, and I went back to do some jail time. And that's when I went and contacted some people from Primary Purpose Group. Back then, there was a phone meeting for PPG Dallas, or at least some people that had worked with Cliff Bishop. Some of you might have heard of him. I know one of you at least knew him pretty well. And I was still a mess, but I started getting on that meeting every week. It was only, I think they had 2 meetings at that time. I would go to my local AA clubhouse and I would try to carry the message. I would have my baby strapped on my body because he came back with me. And I really just kept going through this process. And that's also when I started. So I was recovered. I was introducing myself as recovered. I know people probably have opinions about that, but I wasn't drinking, and that was amazing. And I was helping others. But then the anger and rage. So to go back into that piece is I ended up going back through the steps. And there's some pieces in here that I've gone deeper with in the big book since then. I heard people talk about this, but I don't think I really internalized it in my heart. When it says in We Agnostics, we found too that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? And I didn't realize, but that's all I was doing. I would go into these AA meetings where I lived. I was okay in Primary Purpose Group. But if I went into the meetings where I lived, which I really wanted human aid, so I was still doing that, I was so sick. I was so enraged at these people. I would freak out in meetings. I would be arguing with them at home when I was just by myself, burning myself with a curling iron. And so really, it's been this process of what I believe it talks about in step 4 is, for one, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. For me, that's on all fronts. And that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. That means no human power for me. That means no sponsor. That means no people in AA. They are part of it. I need you guys. I don't want to mistake that I don't need you guys. It's been this process because I was there was a woman, Cindy, that told me a while back that around my step 10s, I was very hyper vigilant. I had a lot of step 10s every day. But I wanted to pick up that phone. Now I can see I wanted you to fix my problems. I wanted to have the right answer. I wanted to have the right sponsor. I wanted to be perfect about the book, but everyone else had to be perfect too. And I wanted you to do everything perfectly, just like I knew I had to. There was so much bondage of self within that whole process that I needed to keep growing out of that. It's not an overnight process, but I needed to start looking at these pieces of, let me see. When it talks about, it is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth, and I love that, it's maintenance and growth. It is progress, not perfection. I have a friend who's been in a lot more treatment centers than I have. She uses that statement, progress, not perfection, and we've talked about this and laughed about it. But I've been there of that I don't really need to be diving into this work. But once I'm in this work and really that willingness is there and everything's growing and looking at the precise directions, which means exact, and going on this, it's the perfectionism will kill me. But so the hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. This business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit, the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. That happened. I got in a fight with my father when I picked up the drink with my son. That was resentment. But I have also had either the curse or the blessing of having resentment come up, and like deep resentment, the point where I'm on my hands and knees praying and crying for the drink to be removed come up in sobriety. It is the most heartbreaking place. And so if I stay in resentment, it does not matter. If I stay in there long enough and it's deep enough or whatever, that's hard to explain exactly which piece could be what. It doesn't have to be my family stuff. It could be with a neighbor. It could be somebody at work. But it hits me in this place and I get shut off from that sunlight of the spirit. It's that simple. That thought to drink again will come. It won't for me matter the amount of meetings. It even won't matter if I'm in 10, 11, and 12, if I stay blocked. So I could do 10 all day, but if I'm still blocked, there are pieces that I'm permitting, but I'm not permitting because I can't see it. And I have victim written above this paragraph. So if I stay in that place within the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, at work, in my occupations, family affairs, it doesn't matter how dysfunctional my family is. My family's going through some major stuff right now. That same daughter that I lost custody of, she is very angry now. She's having a lot of very addictive behaviors. The police were here a lot in sobriety due to some stuff going on. It hasn't looked like, oh, the family's all well. My family is not well. But the thing is I have dedicated this step 3 decision, and it's not even about me attaching my mind to that piece. So I'm not a victim of my outside circumstances. And if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm are not for us. They are also that place of judgment and criticism. I've also heard in the rooms that judgment's just a part of who we are. It is a very strong part of the ego, and it is a very strong part of human nature. But if I keep using this excuse that it's okay to stay in that place and let my thoughts run rampant, my thoughts are as much self-will as anything else, then I will go crazy. I will go back into insanity with all those little pieces. And the next thing that could happen is I can drink, and then I will die. As referring to our list again, and I also missed this part about we avoid retaliation and argument. I've been really powerless over that piece. I was very driven by fear, anger, self-pity, which went into my self-seeking behaviors. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? So this has been a big part of my journey. At first, I couldn't really see the selfishness, and that's okay. We just need to start where we're at, those little pieces. As I grow, it's been really imperative, life-giving, vital for me to see how I show up and the rigorous honesty that has come out of that. Today, I can talk about that I was neglectful and abusive as a mom. For me to give voice to that and have that rigorous honesty around it has actually set me free. And seeing where do I show up in these places. Some of the discussions that me and my sponsor have are tough conversations to have. It is not my job as a sponsor to just push it aside. When it talks about an understanding friend in here, part of that understanding is that what we're getting at about our ego deflation. When Dr. Bob talks about, the 6 steps for complete deflation, dependency, and guidance from a higher power, moral inventory, confession, restitution, continue to work with other alcoholics. Dr. Bob led me through all of these steps. At the moral inventory, he brought up several of my bad personality traits or character defects, such as selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentment. We went over these at great length, and then he finally asked me if I wanted these defects of character removed. When I said yes, we both knelt at his desk and prayed, each of us asking to have these defects taken away. So they were each asking. When they list out those character defects, I believe all of those are part of my personality. I never thought that jealousy would be cast aside. Jealousy and competition, which my sponsor calls just straight meanness, are a part of my personality. And for me to bring that rigorous honesty in about how I can show up today in today's world is what will set us free. When it talks, that's part of, step 5, that am I shining a light on every dark cranny? When it says where are my self-seeking behaviors? Where exactly, how do I show up when you piss me off? Because I would like to think that as being a recovered alcoholic, I don't show up mean, but I can show up mean. I can show up also really self-sacrificing. And when I start to be able to see those things, and look at them in 10 and 11 and again and again and again. And it's not this for years, it's going to be that way. There can be a very quick process of removal, but the willingness to truly see them for what they are. And then in step 6, that objectionability. I start finding them objectionable because I start to try to get control again and again and again. But God's like, I have another plan. This ain't working. You made a step 3 decision. And so finding them objectionable and then asking, I love the 7-step prayer. I don't always know what's good and bad. My ego will convince me that I'm being helpful when I am not. I am going in to save my daughter from addiction. I am going in to help her and be the savior of my daughter's life. And I'll tell you, this has been a very painful process this year. That is not what God's had in store for me. She has went to live back with my father. I don't want to go into all that because I could easily blame and point out things. But can I be grateful, that encouraging piece, that the traditions, I'm a big fan of the traditions and using them as ideals. Can I be encouraging, and can I give my family autonomy, the dignity to have their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, the dignity to see my daughter suffer, that because I've tried time and time again to get in there and fix and manage and control her life, and that is not my purpose today. I wanted it to be, but God has a different plan for me. That's why I'm so grateful that I get to work with others, because that's where God wants me to show up. And just like Dr. Bob, I get to see my own character blockages through my grosser handicaps, through being in this unity with my fellows in Alcoholics Anonymous. Steps 8 and 9, the list, and being willing within that list is really important to straighten out my harms. There are times that I believe people have wronged me more than I have wronged them. And I definitely don't want to give advice to the fellowship about that piece. Step 9 is very important to talk to your sponsor, because we can say stuff on meetings, but there are parts of people's lives that we don't hear about on meetings that's more personal in that relationship with our sponsor. And not just our sponsor and being sponsor dependent, but having a close group of people that we have this spiritual connection with, and that are understanding about how much we need ego deflation and how much my ego will kill me. It will tell me that not only around the alcohol, but around people, places, and things, that this time it's different, that this time I can control this situation, and that delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I manage well. Sharon, I just want to ask you real quick, what time is it? How much time?
Just about there now, Merrily. I don't know if you're winding up now, a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Steps 10 and 11, I've grown those. This place of usually where I'm at fault, this was such a hard place to see for me, is this deep, deep place. And it happened to me before I got on the meeting. I was having a headache today. think I drank a little much caffeine. I wasn't feeling good. And my voice, inner voice, I'm not enough. I'm not going to say enough. I'm not going to do enough. It's not going to be enough. And I was sitting as you guys were meeting, and I went into that God place, and it's like, that's a lie. God gave me the courage, the power, the strength, the clarity to speak on this meeting. I am enough. I am perfect in your eyes. And I say that word with a grain of salt. I am worthy. So those are a lot of the places, wanting validation, wanting power and control over and over again, wanting self-worth and security from other people. It's the same thing over and over in my inventory. Going deeper with that place, really cultivating this relationship with my higher power, really cultivating this time with God. God is still my best friend. When my daughter left, I felt again like I was going to die inside. She just called me right before the meeting. My delusional mind, but it's just not going to look like what I thought it was. And I believe there's something that Cliff used to say, and I can't remember it exactly. Peter might know, but you're not going to get what you want. You're going to thank me one day at a time. And so it doesn't always have to be what I think it should be. And then the most beautiful things grow out of that. My son is thriving. We have peace in our home today. And my daughter's close with my dad. And she's in God's hands, this biggest power in this whole world. And I love when some of our friends talk about we have been given the power to help others. Part of it's been creativity. It's not about what I want, but all these beautiful things. I love seeing people's pictures on Facebook that they're painting and, these things that bring us joy. And that's come through putting 10, 11, and 12 as a priority in my life. If without that, I don't have the power to move through this life. And so I am forever grateful. Step 12. It's not always convenient, but it's always beautiful. I'm really glad I showed up here today to be with you folks, and thanks for having me.